It happened in the middle of a quiet night, the kind where the world outside seemed to hold its breath. I had always been the person you could count on, and he was my person too. My best friend, the one I knew inside out. We had a rhythm together, something that didn't need words. He would walk into my room without knocking, sit on the edge of my bed, and for hours we'd talk about everything and nothing. It was effortless, comfortable, and there was a sacredness to it. I never questioned the boundaries of our friendship, never once wondered if there could be anything more between us. Why would I? He was just him, and I was just me. We were two halves of a perfect whole, both of us content in our worlds. Then that night, everything shifted. I wasn't prepared for it, couldn't have been. He was sitting across from me, his usual smirk replaced by something more uncertain. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard before. My heart thudded. His eyes, always so sure and full of mischief, were now glazed with a depth of emotion I couldn't understand. What was going on? I thought, but I didn't ask. I wasn't prepared to ask, not yet. He just stared at me, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. Then the words spilled out of him like a flood he could no longer hold back. "I'm in love with you." It was a simple sentence, yet it shattered the stillness of everything I thought I knew. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't even close to what I was prepared for. My best friend, the person who had been in my life since the beginning, the one who knew my darkest thoughts, my deepest fears, had just confessed something that felt so completely impossible. I sat there, frozen, unable to breathe, as the silence that followed crushed me. I wanted to laugh, to tell him it was a joke, to tell him he had to be joking. This couldn't be real. But there was nothing funny about the way he was looking at me, nothing sarcastic in the tension that coiled between us. His confession was raw, desperate, and it left me exposed. It left me incomplete. Everything I thought I knew about us was suddenly on the table, turned upside down and shredded, and I had no idea what to do with it. I couldn't speak. It felt like my body had forgotten how to function, my mind screaming, "Say something." But my mouth refused to obey. The room seemed to close in on me, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I kept looking at him, as if I could somehow make sense of the situation by merely staring. He was still watching me, waiting for something, anything, that would tell him I wasn't going to leave. I thought I could feel my heart break right then, but it wasn't the way I expected. It wasn't a crushing weight of disappointment, but a slow, suffocating panic that wrapped around my ribs. I don't understand," I finally managed to whisper, the words trembling on my tongue. And I didn't. I didn't understand how the person who knew me better than anyone else, who had been there for every triumph, every failure, every heartbreak, could suddenly look at me and say those words. He was my best friend. My brother in every sense of the word. We'd grown up together, shared everything, even the stupidest, most embarrassing parts of ourselves. But this was something new, something I had never prepared for, and it made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. If I stepped too far, I'd fall. There would be no going back. He let out a long sigh, a mix of frustration and relief. "I didn't want to tell you like this," he said softly, his voice breaking as if he too was scared of the distance between us now. "But I couldn't keep it in any longer. I've been in love with you for years, and I thought if I just kept pretending everything was normal, maybe it would go away. But it never did. I can't ignore it anymore." His words hit me like a wave, too fast, too powerful, and I could feel myself drowning in them. All this time, this deep connection we shared, Was it always something more to him? Had I missed all the signs? I thought back to all the moments we had shared, the subtle touches, the lingering glances, the closeness that had always felt like home. Had I been blind to something that was always there? I wanted to ask him, why didn't you tell me sooner? But somehow I couldn't bring myself to say it. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I could feel my chest tightening, my mind racing. And then it hit me. I wasn't just shocked by his confession. I was terrified. Terrified because I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know if I should pull away or pull him closer. I didn't know what kind of love he was talking about. Was it the kind that changed everything, that broke friendships apart and ruined lives? Or was it the kind that could somehow survive, even thrive, despite the chaos it caused? The question gnawed at me and I couldn't find an answer. But one thing was painfully clear. My life had just become something I didn't recognize, something that terrified me. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't know how to love him back. Not in the way he wanted. Not in the way I should. The following days were a blur. I tried to act like everything was normal, like that moment hadn't happened, but I could feel the tension thickening between us. Every time he looked at me, there was something different in his eyes, an emotion I couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, but something that seemed deeper, more complicated. I wanted to run away from it, to escape the weight of his confession, but there was nowhere to hide. Everywhere I went, I found myself haunted by the thought of him. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my mind, over and over. I'm in love with you. I kept telling myself that I was overthinking it, that I was making this harder than it needed to be. After all, we were friends. Good friends. Surely we could move past it, pretend like nothing had changed, right? But that was the thing. The more I tried to pretend, the more the cracks in our friendship grew. They were subtle at first, the uncomfortable silences that lingered too long, the way we avoided eye contact, the way my heart seemed to race whenever he was near. And every time he spoke, I felt the weight of his unspoken words pressing down on me, as if he was waiting for me to say something, to make a decision. But I didn't know what decision I could possibly make. How do you return to normal after everything you thought you knew has been turned upside down? Then came the night that changed everything. I had been sitting alone in my room trying to gather my thoughts when I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I almost hoped it was him. But when I opened it, it wasn't who I expected. It was his girlfriend. The one person I knew he was supposed to be happy with. The one who, until that moment, I'd never really thought much about. I froze in the doorway, unsure of what to say or do, and she didn't seem surprised to see me standing there, lost in my own confusion. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling, her eyes shadowed with a kind of fear I hadn't seen before. My mind raced. Talk about what? But before I could ask, she stepped inside. "It's about him," she said, her words coming out in a rush. "I know what he told you." I felt my stomach drop as she continued. "I've known for months. He's been pulling away from me. He loves you. He's always loved you." Her words were like a punch to the gut, and I staggered back, caught in a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't control. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected any of it. She reached out, grabbing my hand, her grip tight. "He doesn't know what to do. He's scared, and so am I, but I'm not going to stand in the way of what's real. I'm not going to pretend I don't see it." In that moment, everything stopped. It was like the world had paused, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest. The truth had been laid bare in front of me, and it was more complicated than I had ever imagined. He was in love with me. But she was in love with him. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I was caught in a storm that had no easy answers. I had never anticipated that love, real, raw, terrifying love, could destroy everything I thought I knew about myself, about him, and about all of us. I spent the next few days in a haze, caught between guilt, confusion, and something I couldn't quite name. The confrontation with her had shattered whatever fragile control I thought I had over the situation. She hadn't come to accuse me or to fight with me, but to offer a kind of heartbreaking clarity. "He's still mine," she had said, her voice quiet, resigned, yet full of strength. "But you're his in a way I can't deny." I didn't know how to respond to that. How do you respond when someone tells you so plainly that the love of their life belongs to someone else, and yet you can feel the pull of that same love tugging at your own heart? I didn't know. I didn't have the words. But everything inside me screamed to do something, to make a decision, to choose one side, to pick a path. And yet I felt paralyzed. The days dragged on, and still, I didn't know what to do. Should I tell him that I couldn't return his feelings? Should I push him away, bury my own confusion under the weight of our friendship? Should I try to preserve whatever part of our bond was left, even if it meant denying the part of me that had always seen him as more than a friend? I kept thinking about what she had said. He's still mine. But was he? Was he truly hers, or had that space between them been filled by something that neither of them could control anymore? And if I did love him back, could I take that step without destroying everything else around us? Then came the evening when I couldn't take it any longer. I called him, my heart pounding, the words stuck in my throat. When he picked up, there was a hesitation in his voice, as if he too had been waiting for something, waiting for me to finally give him an answer to end the silence between us. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. When he arrived at my door, it was almost like nothing had changed, as if we could still be those same two people who had laughed together and shared everything under the sun. But there was a new heaviness in the air, something that neither of us could ignore. We sat on the couch, facing each other, the space between us stretching farther than I'd ever imagined. He looked at me with those eyes, the ones I had always thought were just full of mischief and comfort. But now they were searching, desperate for something I wasn't sure I could give. "What's going on?" he asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper but full of raw emotion. "Why have you been so distant? I can't keep pretending like we're okay if we're not." And that's when I realized I had been running from the truth, from him, from my own feelings. Because in the deepest corners of my heart I knew that this wasn't just about friendship anymore. It was about love. The kind of love that you can't ignore, no matter how hard you try. And in that moment, it felt like I was standing on the edge, looking down at a world that I couldn't escape. The question was no longer if I loved him back. It was whether I had the strength to admit it, to accept the mess we had created together, and to face the consequences of a love that had come out of nowhere but had never been more real. And then there it was, the moment of truth. As I sat there, the weight of everything pressing down on me, I realized that the decision had already been made, whether I was ready for it or not. He was waiting, his gaze steady, his breathing shallow, as if he knew what I was going to say before I did. I could feel the tremor in my own chest, the storm of emotions swirling inside me: fear, desire, regret, hope. It felt like the world had been holding its breath, waiting for me to take the leap, and I couldn't keep pretending that I didn't feel it, that I didn't know what was happening between us. "I'm scared," I finally admitted, my voice barely a whisper. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, the truth I had been avoiding, the one that terrified me more than anything else. I'm scared of what this will do to us, to everything we've built. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw him not just as my best friend but as something more, something real, and it was terrifying. But I can't deny it anymore. My voice cracked, the admission falling from my lips like a confession I had been too afraid to make. I think I love you too. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating as we both sat there in disbelief. For a moment I thought I might have imagined it, that the words I'd just spoken would disappear into the air like a forgotten dream. But then he reached out, tentatively, almost as if he were afraid I might pull away, and his hand found mine. He didn't say anything at first, he didn't need to. His touch was all I needed to feel the weight of the decision we had just made. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about the uncertainty that came with it. The mess, the risk, the consequences. We couldn't go back. Nothing would ever be the same. But as his hand squeezed mine, I knew, deep down, that I wasn't ready to walk away from it. We both understood without saying a word that this wasn't something we could control. The love between us wasn't a neat, tidy package we could put away and ignore. It was wild, it was messy, and it was raw in a way I didn't know how to process. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't want to fight it anymore. I didn't want to keep pretending that I didn't feel the same way. The love that had always been there, beneath the surface, beneath the friendship, had finally come to the surface, and I didn't know where it would take us. I didn't know if we would survive it or if it would destroy everything we had built. But what I did know was this: it was real. And that terrified me more than anything, because it was only just beginning.